Hello and welcome to Master Integrator, and the first episode of this show to feature a member of Federal Parliament. I'm your host, Paul Skelton. Now, I have invited dozens of them, every party. Aaron Violi is the only one who said yes. And about halfway through, he told me the connected home had been sitting on the periphery of his thinking. Then, instead of trying to make up stories on the fly, he invited us in, stating he wants to work more closely with our industry so we can be heard. This is a great conversation, so please stick around and we'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors. Before we get into this episode, a quick thank you to the brands that make Master Integrator possible. This episode is brought to you by ADI Global, formerly Snap One, your one-stop partner for professional integration. ADI brings together powerhouse brands like Control4, Arachnus, Binary and Strong, along with a carefully curated range of distributed products, all under one roof. And they back it up with genuine integrator-first support from system design through to installation and beyond. They're focused on helping you deliver smarter, more reliable projects, because when you win, they win. If you want to learn more, give the team a call on 1-800-990-548. This episode is also brought to you by Blue Sound and Blue OS, the audiophile-grade multi-room audio platform designed for both discerning listeners and custom integration professionals. Supporting high-resolution, 24-bit, 192 kHz audio, Blue OS delivers exceptional sound quality while offering flexible, scalable deployment across residential and commercial projects. With no mandatory cloud accounts required, Blue OS can operate entirely on a local network, providing a secure, privacy-focused solution with reliable local control. Blue Sound is supported in Australia by Amber Technology. This episode is also brought to you by Somfy. If you're tired of juggling multiple apps and protocols for your clients, Somfy's Tahoma Switch Hub connects over 300 brands, so you can control blinds, lights, cameras, garage doors, HVAC, sound systems, and more, all from a single app. One ecosystem, endless possibilities. Visit somfy.com.au to learn more. Now, here's something I haven't said publicly. Over the past year, I've written to dozens of federal members and senators. Labor, Liberal, Nationals, Greens, Independents. I explained what this industry is, what it does, and how many people it employs. The vast majority didn't write back. Now, I don't think that's malice. You can't really pay attention to something you've never heard of. And that, more than anything, is the story of the systems integration industry in this country. We cable the houses, we secure the network, we install the technology that people increasingly rely on to live safely and independently in their own homes. And in Canberra, we barely register. Aaron Violi said yes. He's the federal member for Casey, and he holds 3 shadow portfolios that sit directly over our work: the digital economy, science, technology and innovation, and cybersecurity. Before politics, he spent 15 years in business, including 4 years at a tech startup covering Asia Pacific. What follows isn't a set of announcements. He's clear about that himself. It's something more useful. It's a politician thinking out loud about an industry Canberra's barely looked at, and being straight about what he doesn't yet know. This is Master Integrator. Here's Aaron Violi. So Aaron, welcome to Master Integrator. Thanks for joining me. And I just want to start by saying, thanking you for being the first member of Parliament to actually join me on this show. And I think it's definitely something our industry has needed for a while, because we tend to get forgotten. So I think there's a lot of people who will be happy to see you here.
No, fantastic to be on, and really looking forward to the conversation. And obviously it's an important industry that's growing and becoming more prevalent as we move to a digital world. So given the shadow portfolios, very keen to start the conversation on the podcast and then engage with industry more deeply moving forward.
Excellent. That's exactly what we want to hear. So, I mean, our reach for the show goes well beyond Australia. So there might be a few people watching who aren't familiar with you. So can you give us a little bit of a background of who you are and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I was elected in 2022. So 4 years now in Parliament, re-elected in 2025. A little bit of a humble brag. Increased my margin for while most others in the Liberal Party were going the other way. So that was nice. And I guess more importantly, third generation local. So I've spent my life living here in the community in Casey. My kid's now fourth generation, so I'm a father and a husband. Got a 10 and 12-year-old, which I unfortunately don't see enough of given politics, but love getting to their sport on a Sunday morning. And prior to politics, about 15 years in the private sector, so food manufacturing primarily, a local family business, and then went to Mars Australia and spent about 4 years at Mars, and then spent 3.5, 4 years through COVID, which was fun as a Melburnian, at a tech startup, sort of looking after partnerships and Asia Pacific for a Canadian-based company called Ritual. So that was the sort of background to getting into politics.
So I guess most people have in mind when they think about politicians, they're thinking of someone who is a professional politician and that's it. They've gone, to university, studied policy, and moved from that. With your background in the private sector, how much has that, I guess, dictated how you've then operated in Parliament? And are there lessons you've learnt that you really wish other politicians would know from actually having that practical experience?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I'm a sort of, I don't want to say unique, but interesting that I actually studied politics. My first degree was an arts degree, majoring in politics, and did an honours in politics. So I've always had an interest and a passion. But when I finished university, made the deliberate decision to not, I guess, go down that professional political staffer path. And many do that, and it's not a criticism of that pathway. But for me, it was sort of get into the private sector and spend some time in the real world, so to speak. And then I did an MBA, and when I was as part of my leadership development. And I find the biggest advantage is the principles of running a business, the principles of business apply across any industry. So it's quite interesting, particularly early on, talking to business people and stakeholders, and they would explain their problems and I could naturally understand them because I'd lived them, just in a different, whether you're selling, smart TVs or potato chips, it's a different product. The principles are the same. So that's really helped. Even these tax changes that have come in recently, I can understand it, I guess, from a first principles business owner's perspective. So that's definitely helped me. But then, the flip side is and this is part of these podcasts and these conversations are so important. The world I left 4 years ago has dramatically changed in the last 4 years from technology, AI, and you're just not in the day-to-day of what's happening in business. So I work really hard to stay connected to my community, to small business owners, to industry groups, understanding that if you rely on what happened 4 or 5 years ago, well, you're not going to be in touch with what's happening today. So keeping that balance is really important.
Awesome. I'm not going to go on wild tangents there, but when you say things have changed in 5 years, I get into a lot of conversations to explain to people things have changed in the last 15 to 20 years that they just will not move on from. But that's, yep, on a side point. So obviously you currently oversee 3 shadow portfolios that I guess a lot of people would actually think would be quite separated, being, digital economy, science, technology, innovation, cybersecurity. How do you kind of reconcile that in your mind to make them all combined, essentially, and what is that crossover?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. It's something I've thought a lot about, and Angus Taylor, when he made his decisions, very deliberately put those 3 portfolios together, and he and I had a conversation about that and how they would work. And so broadly, the way I look at it is, yes, they're distinct, but they're connected. So science, technology, and innovation is, how do we create here in Australia the new products, the new ideas that are going to solve the challenges that we face? And that's, multifaceted, from housing to energy to med tech's a big one, to productivity. So how do we create products? How do we create ideas? And Australia has a great track record of that, Cochlear and others, Wi-Fi, et cetera, et cetera. And in that space, there's a combination of, academia, CSIRO and other bodies, and then very importantly, the private sector as well. And how do we incentivize business to invest into the new products, new ideas? But then that moves across to the digital economy. And broadly, when I think of the digital economy, I look at how do we turn those ideas into products that are commercial and can be scalable? Because ultimately, you can have the best product in the world that solves a great problem. But if the value isn't there for the consumer or for the government or the community, we can't roll it out. And if we can't roll it out at scale across the country and ultimately across the world, it's not going to solve the problems that we face. So that's where you go to the digital economy. Then within the digital economy, and this industry is a great example of it, I look at the digital economy in two worlds. There is like the tech sector and tech companies and what they create. But just as importantly, and I don't think talked about enough, and something I continue to talk about is every business is a tech business, and ultimately where the digital economy can give great value is by helping other businesses be better at what they do. And my community's got a lot of tradies and a lot of farmers, and I often talk about that example of how does the digital economy allow a tradie to quote an invoice and do all their paperwork more efficiently, more accurately, get paid quicker and with less hassle, so they can get home and spend time with their family or be on the tools and what they enjoy? How does the digital economy help farmers grow and harvest their crops more efficiently so they can feed the country in a lot more cost-effective way? They're the questions. How does it help in, I guess, the wider economy? And then I move that across to cybersecurity, and we've seen that recently. Ultimately, if people do not feel like their data's safe, they're not going to get scammed, the technology is reliable and going to work for them. If they don't feel like that, they're not going to engage in it, and we're not going to have the uptake. So that's why cyber is so important, because you've got to keep it all safe. You've got to make it all work. Otherwise, people won't adapt and adopt the technologies. The early adopters will, but I guess, the curve, you need the middle and then the late adopters, but the middle won't come on if they don't feel like their data's safe, it's going to work for them. And so as the digital economy grows, we get a lot of efficiencies, we get a lot of economies of scale, but it also builds a lot of, or a lack of resilience unless we invest in it. So that's why cyber is so important and connected to that space. And I guess underpinning all of that is my fundamental belief that the challenges we face as a country and globally, whether it's energy, whether it's climate, whether it's productivity, so many other issues will be and can be solved by technology. History has shown that to be the case. Technology will improve our way of life and our standard of living, provided we get the settings right and we make sure that we're focused on the technology working for the country and for people, and not just making it work for the sake of making it work.
So I guess the good thing is that you've touched on a few things that I want to come back to, but one of the things you just said there around, I guess, helping tradies, because that is who's listening to this. It is a trades audience. We're a trade industry.
Yeah.
What do you want to see that look like in practice? Because we're talking about technology companies. They need help.
Yeah. Yeah, correct. I mean, as an if you look at, say, a builder, for example, there will be a world, and it's probably already out there, where what's the hardest thing they've got to do is probably do their quotes. But with AI, with apps, can they just put all the measurements in? Get all the quoting done. It gives them a good figure. They can then sense check. Yeah, is that actually right? Do I need a tongue in cheek, but seriously, they've gone and met the people, and they're like, I don't really want this job, so I'm going to add 20% on if I get it. Well, that's my, that. So you still, and this is the thing with AI and technology, you still need a human in the loop. But imagine they do ask 5 or 6 questions, put the 5 or 6 questions in, it spits out a number. They then look at the number and go, yep, brilliant, that's right. And then it can auto-generate from there, orders with their suppliers, provide timelines of when things need to be done, automatically invoice. So know that, okay, the project needs to be done by this date. it invoices 30%, 30%, 40% at the end type thing. Automate all of that. Then they can be on the tools. They can train their apprentices. They can, out our way. They love, all our tradies love to get up to Eildon, get up on their jet skis and their caravans in summer. Like that's a practical example. In the smart homes area, we're seeing it in that, with electricians, but also mechanics. We've got friends that are mechanics. A lot of them say to me, no longer are they really working on combustion engines. They're, working with technology with cars and those kind of things as well. So that's a practical example, I guess, of what you'd call the old school on the tools. But, and I know we're going to get to it, but tradies are no longer just on the tools. It is, you are becoming an IT tech expert. And so I think that's a really interesting conversation we're going to have moving forward.
Do you think as a country we're ignoring AI a bit too much, that we kind of put it in a too hard basket and thought it's a bit scary, we're not going to look at it?
I believe so. And I've been in Parliament for 4 years, and I think in my first speech, I spoke about the challenge of technology in the sense that it moves a lot quicker than we can regulate or legislate. And that was a challenge we had to address. And then, 5 months later, October 23, ChatGPT came out, really changed the world. And I was from that point talking about, well, we need to get ahead of the curve. And so to be a little bit political, but the fact that it's sort of taken the government 4 years to deliver a headland speech on AI from the Prime Minister is too late. This speech should have been delivered 3 years ago, to be honest. And so there is a little bit of a head in the sand. There's a little bit of confusion. I mean, the reality is, if you use Google Maps, you're using AI. And AI has been around as a concept since the 50s and in practice for decades. It's more just that it's exponentially improving what we do. And I think people don't understand it's a little bit like electricity in the sense that it impacts everything and everyone. So this idea you can silo artificial intelligence doesn't exist, but obviously it's more profound, and its outputs are unique compared to electricity, as an example.
So you said there about being behind the curve. How do we get ahead of the curve? Realistically, how do we do that?
Yep. So what we should be doing is making sure that our current laws are fit for purpose. And I think the important part about artificial intelligence is realizing that in essence, it is a very sophisticated, very highly developed and developing quickly tool, but it is ultimately a tool to help humans do their job better. So trying not to regulate the technology per se, as opposed to the outcome, is really important. And, an analogy I like to use is if someone's driving their car and they're speeding and they run through a red light and they hit another car and cause a fatality, we don't charge the car. We charge the person driving because they have failed to follow the law around speed. And in many ways, AI is similar. There has to be a human in the loop. There has to be someone responsible. So if you're, as an example, I went to the physio recently and they used an app called Heidi AI, and it just recorded the conversations and made it sort of into terms for the person. But that physio still has a legal obligation to protect my privacy. So if Heidi AI is not doing the right thing in terms of protecting my data, then the physio and anyone using it should be held to account by the relevant authorities. So making sure the laws are fit for purpose, making sure there's accountability within the existing frameworks is the first step. And then when you identify gaps that need to be closed, you need to then close those gaps. But also looking at, and this is where, so that's the existing infrastructure, which is quite easily. But if you look at smart homes as an example, what we haven't done really well is identify, well, what are the next technologies? What are the next frontiers? And, smart cars, smart homes, the Internet of Things is really quite open to huge impacts. Cyber, data, etc., huge benefits, huge impacts if we don't get it right. So how we identify those emerging industries becomes a big focus of something I'm thinking about a lot.
So one of the things you said before is that we are very good as a country of research. I mean, we've developed things like Wi-Fi and Cochlear, and we've got a very good, strong history in that. Where we seem to struggle is the commercialization of the technology.
Correct.
So I guess from your perspective, how do we fix that? And what are those hurdles that are in place that we can actually get rid of and help people get these technologies out there into the market?
Yeah, and it's two parts. What we've developed it well, but then it goes offshore. And so there is an element of recognizing the size of Australia, population wise compared to the US. So there is a natural tendency to, Atlassian as an example, Canva, you can still keep your head office here in Australia, but you're going to have to expand to the US and Europe. And that's a good thing. So I think the conversation really needs to be, how do we keep that technology in Australia? The changes to the tax settings are like the worst thing that could happen, because a lot of tech startups, they're not looking to make their money through revenue. They're looking to make it through building the value of their company and then selling it to a bigger player or to a VC. So by, taxing capital gains at the level they are, that disincentivizes that. And ironically, if you've got money, you're more likely to put it into an established stock like a Woolworths or a Coles in the share market because of the dividend versus the capital. So incentivizing and recognizing that is an important step. And, unfortunately, we said we've gone backwards in the last few months in that regard. But then looking at, the universities and how do we build those partnerships, and the third report, the Ambitious Australia report, identified a lot of this, that there is a ridiculous number of grant applications and bureaucracies and processes. So you could spend your whole life, and people do basically spend 70, 80% of their time in universities applying for grants, trying to find the money. They don't even know I've heard some stories that they didn't even know these grant applications existed to get money for their product. So that's one side of it. Yeah. And also I think is being really honest in identifying the commercial opportunity of those products and ideas that they're creating at universities. And then the second around the R&D tax incentive. So how do we encourage and incentivize businesses to invest in R&D and incentivize them, understanding that there's no guarantee that it's going to succeed. And that's why we need the incentive. I think we sometimes have this hindsight bias, and we look back at all the successful companies and think they were always going to succeed, and don't recognize that there are lots of other companies that have failed. And if you don't get the settings right, they will fail moving forward as well. And then ultimately crowding more capital in shouldn't be about the government picking winners, but creating strong economic conditions and then the strong tax settings to reward those that invest in small businesses, in startups, in new products. That will create that competition and new ideas to flourish. So it's something I think we're working through, 18 months to go till the next election, working through the policies, responding to Ambitious Australia, the tax changes, etc. But it is one of the biggest challenges we face, because we've got productivity at negative 5+%. It's harder and harder to start a small business. Small businesses are the lifebloods of communities, but they're also the biggest drivers of innovation and productivity in this country. But they're also the most vulnerable to economic shocks and economic downturns, because they don't have the diversification or the cash buffers or the ability to downsize like a large organization does through tough times.
So when we talk about things like grants and programs that are available, a lot of small businesses will immediately say, that's not for me. I'm not going to get that. I'm not going to bother. It's too much work to get that up and running. So I'm wondering, from a government's perspective, how much focus should be on communicating what is available to small businesses and kind of holding their hand through the process, compared to letting the market sort it out themselves?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. My natural instinct is we're better to reduce the amount of grants we offer and actually put that money into lower taxes, as an example, lower company taxes, because then every company that's successful automatically keeps more of what they earn, and there's an incentive to invest in the business. And that's sort of what I talk about when I say, instead of picking winners, just creating the economic and tax conditions that everyone that's successful succeeds. But there definitely needs to be, and industry bodies are obviously a good example of this, that there needs to be opportunities for businesses to understand where the grants are and whether they can apply for them. But there's also a situation, talking to a friend of mine who owns his own electrician's business. He employed a female Sparky because she was the best person for the job, no other reason. But he's now got, because of different programs, there are 3 different people that talk to him about that apprentice. And one of them is specifically because she's female, but as he rightly says, well, it actually makes it harder because that's more paperwork, more conversations. And there is a subsidy available that he doesn't apply for because he literally worked out that the time and effort and paperwork to do it, to get the money back, is like, it's not worth it. He goes, I may as well just quote 3 extra jobs and get out and do the work. So I'm naturally skeptical about programs and bureaucracies for the sake of them. It gives the government a nice headline, but it doesn't actually work in the real world for people that are time poor. And like my friend, he's on the tools all day, and every minute of paperwork is time away from his family in the evenings. And that's most tradies and small businesses. So part of designing programs should be talking to those that actually want to use the program. And too often it's designed by public servants who respectfully have not spent a day on the tools or in the private sector. So creating those kind of advisory bodies, I think, are really important as well.
Yeah, and I would argue too that people don't become tradies because they want to do paperwork.
Correct. Yeah, that's because they hate it. So that's technology again. How do we reduce their paperwork and help them with that? That'll make them a lot happier. I know that for sure.
So, I mean, obviously, when talking about AI, we've talked a little bit about, I guess, the idea of policies to try and get people out there with technology. Cybersecurity is obviously a massive part of this as well. We saw what happened even just this week, because we've had AI try to do a cyber attack.
Yeah.
At this point, has it just become noise? Are people desensitized to what's happening out there, or are they just hoping that someone else will fix it for them?
I do worry that there's a level of complacency and noise in terms of the old "she'll be right" attitude, and there's probably also a level of just lack of awareness of probably how connected things like smart TVs, all the smart devices are. I mean, this is many years ago now, but I remember when I was at Mars Australia, and there was a documentary that came out, or maybe it was a movie, about how people, like, government agencies and people were sort of looking at cameras and that. And so there was a lady in the office that had put tape over her camera, but at the same time she was talking about her Alexa that she had at home. And I remember saying, and this is before I was obviously in politics, but I remember saying to her, hang on, you're worried about your camera, but you've literally got a microphone connected to the internet in your house. Like, she's like, oh yeah, I hadn't really thought of that. And I guess that's part of it. And in fairness to everyone, we're all so busy living our lives that unless you're sort of in the industry or you're thinking about it day to day, you're not going to really be conscious of it. And a lot of people aren't technically, savvy enough to understand that, sounds silly, but people don't think, oh, okay, my TV is actually connected to the internet. So if it's connected that way, someone can come in the other way as well. And if there's a camera there, they can hack into it. Unless you watch it, that sounds silly, but it's unless you're watching a movie about it or you're in the industry, you're not thinking about it. So there's a lot of work we need to do to educate people, but also that's really about making sure that as we become more connected, we've got that resilience and those firewalls, because we've seen how fragile the economy and our systems can be when, you look at Telstra going down, and in Victoria, people couldn't get the V-Line train back to their homes. So people had come into Melbourne for the day and had to stay overnight because they couldn't get a taxi. Uber was surcharging, and the trains weren't running. And that's my point around the cyber world, that if we lose that trust that, I can't catch a train, then people are going to, I mean, it's a bit extreme, but they'll say, well, take me back to the steam engine. At least it might be slower, but I know it'll get me where I need to go on the day I want to get there.
It's interesting. So coming from the perspective of running an industry association, it always comes up about people want to know who's actually responsible for the technology.
Yep.
And, when we're talking about homes that have lighting control systems, smart TVs, aged care installations, there's always this question that I have with lawyers as well of, well, is it the homeowners, the installer, or the supplier responsible? And the answer is always yes and no. I'm thinking, that's not helpful. So from your perspective, how do we sort out this idea of responsibility and who is responsible?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not going to lie, Paul. And this is the part of these conversations. It's important. It's sort of been periphery, to be honest, in my thinking, and this is why it's so important to engage with industry bodies, because you've got so many. I don't want to say niche in terms of it's a small issue. It's a really important issue, but again, digital is everything. So there's all these different issues, and I think that's part of understanding. Well, ultimately, the manufacturers will have responsibilities that they need to have about their products. So I guess very simplistically, is the initial product meeting the requirements that they have? But then the second question, which I was touching on before, is, and I'm not going to profess to have the answers to these today, but is the requirements on the manufacturer acceptable? And we need to have we need to have conversations in this country that we're sort of touching on, but we haven't lent into. Also, it's not just the manufacturer, it's also, let's be honest, where is the product manufactured and what are the legal requirements of the country that it's been manufactured in, and do they still have access to that device? They're important national security conversations. So where's the product? And then there obviously goes to the, is the installer installing it correctly? And it sounds like we're probably not defining what correct is at the moment. And then, as always, if you've put something into your house, you also have a level of responsibility. But I think that sort of goes to your problem. You can argue all three people have a level of responsibility, and then the question becomes who's legally responsible. And I think we have not done enough yet in this space, particularly around homes. And I think a lot of people that would be installing devices would probably not understand how vulnerable it could potentially make them. And what we need to do, and I know the industry would be aware of this, is make sure that there's not a big incident, sort of forward lean into it, because you don't want to lose, again, that sort of trust in the devices, because that'll impact the industry. People won't take them up.
For more than 20 years, Connected Magazine has been the leading voice for the Australian AV and custom integration industry, and it continues to hold that position today. Commercial and residential integrators can head to Connected Magazine or connectedmag.com.au for the latest news, new products, and deeper insight into where the industry is heading. To learn more, head to the website. The link is in this episode's description, or have a chat with the team next time you see them at a trade show or local event.
Now, if you're looking for serious design firepower behind your next project, let me introduce you to Colosseum. Colosseum is a white label design and documentation partner built specifically for integrators, specialising in cinema and media room design, lighting control, and automation engineering. And their new Spark program is a big deal. If your vendor is Spark enabled, you can unlock Colosseum designed cinemas at nearly half the usual cost. Lower upfront investment, immersive 3D walkthroughs, faster sales conversations. Colosseum really is the design and documentation wingman you didn't know you needed. So is there a way in your mind then that we can actually force those conversations to actually happen? Because it seems like we're teasing them, but it doesn't seem to go much
Yeah.
further.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity for the industry to, engage with myself and engage, there'll be some, as part of our challenge with Federation, there'll be some things with at a state level and at a federal level, and then obviously with the government directly engaging with them. And I always find and this is my sort of bias, I've got a bottom up approach as opposed to a top down. Like if, could I get some advice and dictate some policies to industry? Yeah, well, ultimately, ministers and shadow ministers create the policy. But for me, it's a lot better, instead of me saying, oh, I think we should do ABC, if industry's coming to me and to the government and going, hey, we've had some roundtables, we've had some thoughts, here's what we're thinking, and then building together. Because what you don't want to do, in my mind, is put things in place that might keep everyone safe, but it also shuts down the industry because it's not viable. And everything in politics is a trade-off. There's never because if there's no trade-off, you'd already be doing it. So and unintended consequences are very real. So for me, I think the next part of this is continuing to engage with yourself and the industry and those on the tools to go, well, what's missing? What are you concerned about? How do we create a framework to hold you to account, protect people, but not stifle or close down the industry or add too much cost? And ultimately, you've then got to make a decision and a trade-off. But I find it's always better for industry, broad comment, any industry, if you know there's a concern, you're better to lean into it and provide some solutions before it blows up in the community, because then as a general comment, politicians are then on the back foot trying to regulate and legislate after the horse has bolted, and that's when you get rushed sort of policy as a broad comment, not about your industry. So working together with the regulators and the lawmakers, if you identified a gap, is really important.
I think there'll be a lot of people listening to this would actually be quite happy to hear that there is potential to have that conversation, because, as I mentioned right at the start of this, for a long time, the smart home industry in particular has been very neglected. It feels like we've kind of fallen into this weird kind of black hole of nothingness. And look, everything we've spoken about so far today, also, it does really come back to the assumption there's skilled people and there is that technical workforce out there. So from your perspective, does the workforce actually get addressed enough in policy that does exist?
Yeah, no, I think it's a gap. And sometimes it's really hard to work out where the gap is in terms of something I've talked about a lot is micro credentials. So like this is again a balance of how do you make sure that people have confidence if I'm installing smart technology that the person doing it is doing the job correctly. Like you always want to avoid those cowboys in any industry, and knowing the risk profile is important on that. But again, you don't want to make it onerous. Trying to work out how much structure you need around it is really important. And again, you don't want to create a closed shop that you've got to jump through, 50 hoops to be able to work in the industry. I know I'm sort of sitting on the fence here, but this is the challenge we wrestle with. But again, similar to the legislative perspective, skills organically grow when there's a need. People get trained up, and then when it gets to a scale, people go, okay, now we need to put some regulation around it, potentially. I mean, I always look at a risk base, like, obviously electricians, plumbers, if people can die if you install it incorrectly, well, you've got to have really strict. So I think starting at that, what's the worst case, and then working back. But if you give those good sort of frameworks and requirements, it gives consumers confidence that they're using good people as well. And so I think there is a place for a certification. Now, again, whether it's there's different models of an industry body that does the certification versus a government sort of certification to give confidence is important. But yeah, unfortunately, there's always a lag in skills. I mean, it's supply and demand, as you know. Once things become more popular, then people need more workers. The more people get trained, there's a shortage of workers. So then people start getting paid more. So then people go, well, hang on, I'm going to add this skill set, whether I'm a Sparky or I'm going to add it to my skill set so I can earn more money. And then it closes the skills gap. So, I mean, that's kind of the natural sort of progression of things. But we've got to be alive to that as well, for sure.
Yeah, you've definitely just described the current state of our industry of needing people, but also not being able to find anyone. But yeah, it's been a very long, drawn-out process to get where we are.
Yeah, and which is, I mean, it's frustrating, but when you sort of, and let's be honest, like you are new frontier kind of leading technology. There's always going to be that. You're never going to have, I mean, I learned that sort of through my business career, like you very rarely, whether it's a business or an industry or a new when you're cutting edge, like we used to sell organic and gluten-free potato chips and corn chips, and our manufacturing capacity and our sales never lined up perfectly. You either had, it was a slow month and you're like, oh gosh, what are we going to do? Or suddenly the next. So, I mean, there's kind of a naturalness to that supply and demand imbalance, as frustrating as it is, because like I said, once there's a shortage, you then start getting more people jumping in because generally people will pay. But the risk is you don't want to reach the point where there is a shortage and people aren't willing to pay, and then the industry doesn't succeed. So I think there is a role to play for government. But again, working out state versus federal is part of the challenge.
So I guess one of the things I do kind of want to go back and touch on is innovation. Obviously, that's in the title of one of your portfolios, so it's quite important. It seems like there's this idea around innovation that it's done in a lab, a hermetically sealed environment, and realistically, that's not true. So,
correct.
I'm wondering from your perspective, then, how do we actually, I guess, support that innovation that's happening out there on job sites and actually get those guys out to commercialization to be bigger than they currently are, rather than saying, well, it's not done by an official researcher or done by a doctor, for example, so we can't support it.
Yeah, well, that's primarily the R&D, so research and development tax incentive. So that creates a framework for businesses that are investing to be able to, in the private sector, get a tax incentive, which makes it, helps with their cash flow, and there's some changes in that space at the moment. So I met with some tax advisors that sort of work in this R&D tax incentive space last week. So that's a space we're looking at to really help the private sector. There's also a question of, similar to what we were talking about before, if you're a small business owner and you've got an idea, you're probably not even aware, unless you've got an accountant that understands the R&D tax incentive, that it's there to encourage that investment. So there's a bit about that in terms of, how do we encourage business to create those new ideas? But I also think about, well, we might not create the idea here in Australia, but you look at your industry, and if there's a product that's overseas that is going really well, like, I don't have the answer to this and be interested in, I'm sure I'll get some feedback from now I put this out there, I might get some feedback from some in the industry, but like, I don't have this answer, but you've just triggered for me. How easy is it to bring a new product into Australia and roll it out in Australia? Because it's two parts. So it's I think of innovation and can we create the product here in Australia and manufacture it and sell it from Australia, but also again, we 28, 29 million people into the supply chain, so to speak. There'll be brilliant tech products overseas, particularly in your space. How easy is it to get in? And judging by the smile,
it's not. So this is 20 years in the industry for me this year. I can tell you we are one of the hardest, if not the hardest country to bring new product into.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great example. Like I remember when I was it's a great example, sorry, of understanding where we sit as a country, and people would assume we have the best, and we don't always have that. And again, I remember when I was at Mars, a vice president from the United States was talking about he came to visit us, and talked about a few things, and he said one of the great things about Australia as a country is it's similar to the US. So we know if we launch a product here and it sells well in Australia, it'll sell well in the US. But also, this is the kicker that's really important for this conversation. He then goes, but if it fails, it doesn't really matter because you're so small that the cost isn't great. And that was really enlightening for someone that had, as a spent his whole life in Australia. Like, you can be a global business and have a global product and not sell it in Australia, and you're going to be fine. And we need to recognise that and meet the world as it is, not as you'd like it to be. So I do spend time thinking about how do we make it easier to bring products in. And the feedback I get is we're probably too far the other way in terms of having too many barriers, particularly around technology. I mean, coming from a farming community and having family in farming, like, to be very clear, we need strict borders when it comes to biosecurity and things like that as well. But while we want to make products here in Australia, if we can bring new products in, I think what people forget is, it might not be manufactured here, but it creates jobs here because people need to install it. People need to maintain it. There's salespeople that need to sell the products. But also, if it's a great product that improves our lives, well, that helps everyone because people are living better lives as well. So getting that export and import balance right is really important. Now, we don't want to be flooded with products that are going to undercut the Australian market. But if there's a unique bespoke product that's been created in Europe or the US that has a copyright, et cetera, you want companies to be able to bring it in and sell it and improve the standard of living for Australians while also supporting their businesses as well. So happy to chat more offline about how we can help with those. Sounds like I'm touched on there.
Yep. Yeah. I think if nothing else, that's the one thing you're going to get feedback about. Yep. Especially from the suppliers.
I know we're sort of getting to the end, so we'll test how many people have stayed for the whole thing. But I do hope and expect I'll get some feedback from the industry, and that's why I was really keen to come on because in an innovation digital economy similar to AI, I touch sort of every part of the economy, and so there's different issues for everyone. Unless you're talking to those on the front line, you can miss a lot of things, and not going to pretend we can click our fingers and solve every problem, but having the conversation is always the best start. If we're not talking about it, we can't solve it.
Exactly. So if we start to look to wrapping up because of time, I guess moving forward, so as we come up to the next election, is there anything that people who are listening to this, especially integrators in tradespeople, as they go into the next election, they can sit there and say, okay, Aaron has done this for us. We know this is tangible. We can hold on to this and say, okay, and that benefits me directly as a tradie.
Yep. Interesting. So, while I'm not going to announce policies today, let me talk about the principle. One thing I think about in this space is technology moves so rapidly, so that the issues we're grappling with AI today, we sort of need to have them solved in the next 6 to 12 months. So they won't be the next issue at the election. So in terms of nitty-gritty policy in tech, it actually does need to, you build your principles and your frameworks, and then you need to move it to the final detail a bit closer because the world moves very quickly. But I guess in this space, what I'd love people to think about is ultimately, whether it's me or the party that, tradies go, okay, the coalition have a plan to help my business broadly by helping the economy. As an example, the instant asset write-off we've increased to we've committed to increasing it to $50,000, which I think helps tradies, but then potentially helps this industry because people are then more likely to invest in new technology solutions that you would need to be installed. So I think the first thing we need to recognize is the economic challenges, whether it's cost of living for people, but what we all live in of the cost of doing business is harder than ever. So we need to get those big pillars right. But what I'd love to be able to do in the next 18 months, specifically around this industry, is solve a couple of those problems or have some ideas on those problems. Like, how do we get new products into the country easier? What's the skills gap we need to solve? And then how do we encourage, the tradies that are installing them, if they've got new products, how do they get access to the capital to launch those? So I think they're the kind of, off this conversation and off, thinking about things, how do we do that? And how do we move, and some of this is industry-led and some is political, but how do we move smart technology from, really early, feels a little bit like it's still early adoption. People aren't talking about it a lot or considering it for their builds and their renovations. How does it become mainstream? Because we will get to a point where every house is connected to the internet. And now that brings risk, but it brings huge opportunities. And so what do we do to encourage that as lawmakers is something I've been thinking about. And it fits within the digital economy, and it will fit as a sort of key part of our strategy, particularly when I talk about, digital economy is ingrained with the real world. Well, I mean, I can't think of a better example than your industry that is literally bringing technology to homes and the real world and providing those benefits for people as well. So, while there's no specifics there, hopefully that gives people a bit of thinking of I guess the roadmap. And we were talking before about 20 years is a long time, 18 months is a lifetime in politics and policy in the modern world. So we've just got to build it out. But what do I want? What's my vision for this industry? To see more people taking up smart technology so they can improve their lives, but know that they're secure in doing that and wanting to take up the technology. And so if people want to take it up and they feel safe and they see the benefits, then the industry will grow. And as it grows, we need to make sure we've got frameworks in place that you're not getting fly-by-nighters. You've got good standards, clear clarity, which it's a little bit horse and cart, as I said before. But if I've got confidence the person installing the devices has all the qualifications and is trustworthy, well, then I'm more likely to install it and not have issues. And then my friends will see the benefit of it and they'll go, oh, this is great. I'm going to get these devices too. Okay, they're certified. I can trust them. Just moving along the curve to mass adoption. A lot of responsibility on industry because, the impression people leave with people is so important. But making sure people have confidence is the next step for sure from a legislative and regulatory framework.
Excellent. Well, that kind of brings us to the end of the time. So thank you so much for joining me. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation.
No, thank you as well. And as I sort of said, keen to engage with the industry. And so I wanted to make the time to jump on and I guess introduce myself, so to speak, to the industry. And sure it'll be the start of a wider conversation because it's an important emerging space that we need to finish by saying, like, you look at different example, don't get me wrong, but like social media kind of just swept over us and now we're playing catch up and different technology. But how do we make sure that this technology doesn't just sweep over the country? Let's try and get ahead of it as best we can, I think is in the benefit of the country and the benefit of the industry. And ultimately, that's what we're here to do, solve problems before people even know they're a problem. That's the sweet spot we're looking for.
A huge thank you to Aaron Violi for joining me today. A few thoughts on the way out. The moment that stuck with me from this conversation came about halfway through. I asked who is actually responsible when the connected home is compromised, the homeowner, the installer, or the supplier. And Aaron told me straight that the question had been sitting on the periphery of his thinking. Now, he could have bluffed, because plenty would have. Instead, he said he didn't have the answer yet, and then he said something far more useful than an answer. He said it sounds like we're probably not defining what correct even looks like at the moment. And he's right. And that gap is ours to close, not his. Because the other thing he said, more than once, is that he works bottom up rather than top down. He would rather industry came to him with roundtables and positions and a considered view than have rules written about us without us. He put that invitation on the table twice. Once about responsibility and standards, and once about how hard it is to get new product into this country, which after 20 years in this industry, I can tell you is a recurring complaint I hear from suppliers. He also left us with a warning worth sitting with. Social media swept over this country before anyone had worked out what to do about it, and we've been playing catch-up ever since. Connected technology is headed the same way. His words were solve problems before people even know they're a problem. So here is where that leaves us. For years, we have said nobody in Canberra is listening. Well, this week, one of them was. The question now is whether we turn up with something worth saying. If you have a view on standards, on certification, on the import barriers, or on the skills shortage, send it to me. I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go. Thanks as always to the sponsors who made this show possible. ADI, Blue Sound by Amber Technology, Somfy, Coliseum, and Connected Magazine. I'd also like to take this moment to reiterate my invitation to any and all members of Parliament. You're welcome on the show, and you're welcome to speak to our industry. Simply check your inbox. You'll undoubtedly have received an email from me. Thanks for listening to Master Integrator. I'm Paul Skelton. I'll see you next time.